The HR manager looked at the 68-year-old man sitting across from her and didn't even try to hide her smirk. "Grandpa, I think you're confused. This isn't a retirement home, it's Goldman and Sterling Investment Bank." But when she glanced at his application and saw his last name, her face went white, and everyone in that office realized they'd just made the most expensive mistake of their careers. Thomas Edward Sterling adjusted his reading glasses and looked around the gleaming conference room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's financial district. At 68, he knew exactly how he appeared to these people. Old, out of touch, probably senile for even applying. His gray hair was thinning. His suit, while expensive, was clearly from another era, probably the 90s, they'd assume. His hands showed age spots and a slight tremor that made holding his coffee cup an exercise in concentration. The interview panel consisted of 4 people, all young enough to be his grandchildren. They sat across from him with expressions ranging from confusion to barely suppressed amusement. Jennifer Walsh, the HR director, was 32 and wore her ambition like armor. She'd been checking her phone every 30 seconds since Thomas walked in, clearly considering this a waste of her valuable time. Marcus Chun, VP of Investment Strategy, was 38 and looked like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. His suit probably cost more than Thomas's monthly rent. He leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. Ashley Rodriguez, senior portfolio manager, was 29 and had that particular brand of cruelty that came from being successful too young. She was openly texting under the table, not even pretending to pay attention. And finally, Blake Morrison, chief operations officer, was 41 and had the dead-eyed look of someone who'd sold their soul for money years ago and was perfectly fine with the transaction. "So, Mr. Sterling," Jennifer began, glancing at his resume with barely concealed disdain, "why don't you tell us why you think you'd be a good fit for our senior financial analyst position?" Thomas opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus cut him off with a laugh. "Actually, before we get into that, can I just ask, how did you even hear about this position? This was posted on LinkedIn and our corporate site. Do you know what LinkedIn is?" The condescension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "I'm familiar with LinkedIn, yes," Thomas said quietly. "Really?" Ashley looked up from her phone for the first time, clearly intrigued by the opportunity to mock someone. "What about Excel? PowerPoint? Bloomberg Terminal? Do any of those ring a bell, or are you more comfortable with, like, a typewriter?" The group laughed. Even Blake, who'd been stone-faced until now, smirked. "I can use all of those programs," Thomas replied, his voice still calm but with a slight edge now. "Can you, though?" Marcus leaned forward, clearly enjoying this. "Because I'm looking at your resume here, and your last position was... Let me see. You were self-employed for the past 15 years. What does that even mean? Were you driving Uber? Which, no judgment if you were. But that's not exactly relevant experience for a position at one of the most prestigious investment banks in the world. I was managing personal investments and consulting privately," Thomas explained. "Consulting," Jennifer repeated with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "So you were unemployed?" "No, I was Mr. Sterling," Blake interrupted, his voice cold and efficient. "Let me be direct. This position requires someone who can work 80-hour weeks, handle extreme stress, make split-second decisions involving millions of dollars, and keep up with market conditions that change by the second. Someone who's sharp, quick, and at the top of their game." He looked Thomas up and down meaningfully. "No offense, but you're 68 years old. You should be retired. You should be playing golf, spending time with grandkids, maybe doing some light consulting on the side. Not trying to compete with analysts in their 20s and 30s who are hungry, technologically savvy, and frankly have the stamina this job demands." Thomas sat there taking it all in. He'd expected this, had prepared himself for it, but experiencing it was still like being slapped. "I understand your concerns," he said carefully, "but I believe my experience..." "Experience from when?" Ashley interrupted. "The 80s? The 90s? Sir, the market has completely changed. The algorithms we use now didn't exist when you were working. High-frequency trading, cryptocurrency, AI-driven analysis. Do you even know what any of that means?" "I do, actually. Knowing what they are and being able to work with them are two different things," Marcus said. "Look, I'm sure you were very successful in your day, but your day was a long time ago. The financial world has evolved. You haven't." Jennifer stood up, clearly done with this charade. "Mr. Sterling, I'm going to save us all some time here. You're not qualified for this position. Not because of your resume, though that's concerning, but because of your age. This is a young person's game. It requires energy, technological fluency, and frankly, a certain mindset that people your age just don't have anymore." "That's age discrimination," Thomas said quietly. "Which is illegal." "Oh, here we go." Blake rolled his eyes. The legal threats. Listen, Mr. Sterling, we're not discriminating against you. We're being realistic. If we hire you and you can't keep up, which you won't, we'll have to fire you anyway. We're actually doing you a favor by being honest now. Plus, Ashley added with a cruel smile, you'd be miserable here. Everyone else on the floor is under 40. You'd be the weird old guy everyone feels awkward around. The one who doesn't get the jokes, doesn't understand the references, probably complains about the music being too loud. Is that really how you want to spend your final working years? Thomas felt something inside him crack. Not break, he'd been through too much for that, but crack. These children, these arrogant children who'd been handed success without struggle, were dismissing him like he was nothing. I think we're done here, Jennifer said, gathering her papers. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Sterling. We'll be in touch. The universal phrase for you'll never hear from us again. Actually, Thomas said, his voice suddenly different, harder, more authoritative. I'd like to speak to your CEO. The room went silent for a beat, then erupted in laughter. The CEO? Marcus was practically crying with amusement. Dude, our CEO is Richard Goldman. Richard Goldman, one of the most powerful men in finance. You think he has time to meet with every rejected applicant? Especially one who's old enough to be his father, Ashley added. I think he'll want to meet with me, Thomas said calmly. And why's that? Blake asked with exaggerated patience, like he was talking to a child. Because of my last name. Jennifer glanced at the resume again, rolling her eyes. Sterling. So what, it's a common name, not Edward Sterling. That's my full name. Thomas Edward Sterling. The room went quiet. Marcus's smirk faded slightly. Blake sat up straighter. Wait, Ashley said slowly, the cruelty draining from her voice. Edward Sterling? Like ... like the Edward Sterling? I don't know who you think the Edward Sterling is, Jennifer said dismissively, though her voice had lost some of its confidence. But I'm sure Goldman and Sterling, Thomas said quietly. This company was originally Goldman and Sterling Investment Partners, founded in 1982 by Richard Goldman and Edward Sterling, my father. The color drained from Jennifer's face so fast she looked like she might faint. Your ... your father? Marcus stammered. My father, Edward Sterling, who died 3 years ago and left his 49% ownership stake in this company to me, making me the second largest shareholder of Goldman and Sterling. And the company you all work for. Blake had gone completely white. Ashley's phone clattered to the table. Jennifer looked like she was going to be sick. So when you asked if Richard Goldman would want to meet with me, Thomas continued, his voice still calm but now carrying unmistakable authority, the answer is yes, because we have a shareholders meeting tomorrow and I'm planning to attend, for the first time since my father passed. He stood up slowly, gathering his things with deliberate care, and I'm very much looking forward to discussing this interview with him. Every single detail of it. The silence in the room was so complete you could hear the air conditioning humming. Mr. Sterling, Jennifer finally managed, her voice shaking. We didn't know. Your application didn't mention that my father founded this company? Thomas looked at her directly. It's in the company history. It's on the website. It's literally in the name of the firm. But you didn't look. You saw an old man and decided I was worthless before I even spoke. We made a mistake, Blake said quickly, his cold efficiency replaced by panic. A terrible mistake. Obviously, if we'd known who you were, then you would have treated me differently, Thomas finished. Which is exactly the problem. You should treat everyone who walks through that door with basic respect. Not because they might be secretly important, but because they're human beings. He walked to the door, then paused and turned back. I came here for 2 reasons. First, to see if my father's company was living up to the values he built it on. And second, to see if I wanted to take a more active role in running it. After this experience, I have my answers. Mr. Sterling, please, Jennifer was almost begging now. Let us explain. Explain what? That you judge people by their age instead of their abilities? That you mock applicants in interviews? That you create a hostile environment for anyone over 40? Yes, please do explain that to Richard Goldman tomorrow. He opened the door, then looked back one final time. Oh, and Jennifer, you're right about one thing. I am going to be spending time with my grandchildren. Specifically, my grandson who just graduated from Wharton. He was going to start here next month. I'll be recommending he work for one of your competitors instead. The ones who value experience and don't. Treat people like garbage based on their date of birth. And with that, Thomas Edward Sterling walked out of the conference room, leaving behind 4 people who had just realized they'd humiliated one of the most powerful men in their company. The fallout was going to be spectacular. And Thomas was going to make sure they learned a lesson they'd never forget. The moment the door closed behind Thomas, the conference room erupted in panic. Oh my God, Ashley whispered, her phone forgotten on the table. Oh my God, we just We just mocked Edward Sterling's son. 49% shareholder, Marcus added, his face pale. 49%. Do you understand what that means? He can force almost any decision he wants. It can override most of what Goldman decides. We're fired, Jennifer said flatly. We're all fired. There's no coming back from this. Wait. Blake stood up, pacing frantically. How are we supposed to know? His application didn't say anything about being Edward Sterling's son. Because he was testing us, Ashley snapped. Don't you see? He came in here deliberately looking old and vulnerable to see how we'd treat someone like that. And we failed. Spectacularly. Jennifer was scrolling frantically through her phone. Oh God, there are photos of him online. Thomas Edward Sterling, Edward Sterling's only son, Harvard Business School, worked on Wall Street in the 90s, made a fortune in tech investing before the dot-com bubble. He's not some senile old man, he's a goddamn legend who's been out of the public eye for years. She looked up, her face ashen. It says here he's worth over $2 billion personally, separate from his inheritance. $2 billion. And we told him he should be retired, Marcus groaned, head in his hands. I called him dude. I asked if he knew what LinkedIn was, Ashley said, her voice hollow. I'm 29. I'm going to be fired at 29. Blake grabbed his phone. I need to call Richard. Right now. We need to do damage control before what? Jennifer cut him off. Before the second largest shareholder tells the CEO that his interview team treated him like garbage. Blake, that ship has sailed. Maybe he won't say anything, Marcus said hopefully. Maybe he's not vindictive. Are you insane? Ashley exploded. We humiliated him. For 20 minutes. We laughed at him. I told him he'd be the weird old guy everyone felt awkward around. Why wouldn't he report this? The room descended into panicked silence, broken only by Jennifer's frantic typing. Okay. She said, I'm drafting an apology email. Maybe if we grovel enough in email. Blake looked at her incredulously. You think an email is going to fix this? What else do you want me to do? Show up at his house? Actually, a cold voice said from the doorway. That won't be necessary. They all spun around to see Richard Goldman standing there. At 65, he was everything his employees aspired to be. Powerful, wealthy, commanding. Silver hair, perfectly styled, custom suit that cost more than a car, and an expression that could freeze lava. Mr. Goldman, Jennifer jumped up. We can explain. Explain how you just humiliated my business partner's son in an interview. Yes, please do explain that. You know, Marcus asked weakly. I know because Thomas called me from the lobby. He told me everything. Every single thing you said to him. Richard walked into the room slowly, deliberately, like a predator circling prey. Let me make sure I have this correct. You told a 68-year-old applicant who happens to be Thomas Sterling, one of the most respected investors of his generation, that he should be retired, playing golf, that he's too old to keep up, that he doesn't understand modern technology. He pulled out his phone and started reading. Ashley Rodriguez told him he'd be the weird old guy everyone feels awkward around. Marcus Chun called him dude and implied he was unemployed. Blake Morrison suggested he lacks the stamina required for the job. And Jennifer Walsh, our head of HR, told him directly that he's not qualified because of his age. Richard looked up, his eyes cold. Do any of you understand the legal liability you just created? The discrimination lawsuit that Thomas could file right now and win instantly? The PR nightmare this would be if it got out? We didn't know who he was, Blake tried. You shouldn't need to know who he was. Richard's voice exploded through the room. You should treat every applicant with respect. That's basic human decency. That's also the law. But sir, Jennifer tried, we have legitimate concerns about older workers keeping up legitimate concerns. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Jennifer, I'm 65 years old. Am I too old to keep up? Should I retire? Am I the weird old guy? No, sir, of course not. Then why is Thomas? Why is any 68-year-old? What magical age is it where people suddenly become useless? Nobody answered. Let me tell you something about Thomas Sterling, Richard continued, his voice dropping to something more dangerous than yelling. His father, Edward, was my best friend. We built this company together from nothing. When Edward got sick, Thomas helped us through. When Edward died, Thomas inherited his stake but chose to stay hands-off. He trusted me to run things. He looked around the room. And how do we repay that trust? By treating his son like garbage when he shows up for an interview. We thought he was just some old man looking for a job, Marcus said weakly. He is just some old man looking for a job, that's the point. You should be treating just some old man with respect. The fact that he's Thomas Sterling makes it worse because of the legal and business implications. But it shouldn't change the fundamental issue. You discriminated against someone based on their age. Ashley was crying now. Mr. Goldman, please, I'm so sorry. I don't usually what? Discriminate? Or don't usually get caught? Richard pulled up a chair and sat down, his anger giving way to something more calculating. Here's what's going to happen. Thomas is coming to the shareholders meeting tomorrow. He's going to tell the board exactly what happened here. And then the board is going to vote on several proposals. He ticked them off on his fingers. 1. A complete overhaul of our hiring practices to eliminate age discrimination. 2. Mandatory diversity training for all employees with emphasis on age bias. 3. The establishment of an elder advisory board bringing in experienced professionals over 60 to provide guidance. And 4. He looked at each of them in turn, the immediate termination or reassignment of everyone involved in today's interview. Sir, please, Jennifer started. I haven't decided yet which it'll be. That depends on how you conduct yourselves between now and tomorrow's meeting. And on whether Thomas wants your heads on pikes or is willing to show mercy you frankly don't deserve. He stood up. You're all suspended pending the board's decision. Clear out your desks. You'll be notified tomorrow. Mr. Goldman, Blake said desperately, I have a family, a mortgage. I can't. You should have thought about that before you told a man he's too old to work. Actions have consequences, Blake, even for people who think they're untouchable. Richard walked to the door, then paused. By the way, you might want to know what position Thomas was actually applying for. He wasn't applying for senior financial analyst. That was a test. He wanted to see how we treat applicants at the entry level, how we treat people who don't have obvious power. Then what was he really here for? Jennifer asked. He's considering taking his father's old position, co-CEO, which would make him my equal and your ultimate boss. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. So when you see him tomorrow, you might want to start thinking of better explanations than we didn't know who he was, because that just proves his point. You only respect people when you think they have power. Richard left, and the 4 remaining people sat in stunned silence. After a long moment, Ashley spoke. We're so fucked. Nobody disagreed. Meanwhile, Thomas sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Goldman and Sterling building, his hands shaking, not from age, but from suppressed rage and hurt. His phone rang. Richard. Thomas, I am so deeply sorry. Don't apologize for them, Richard. You weren't there. I know, but they represent my company, your father's company, and they violated everything we built it to be. Thomas stirred his coffee slowly. And do you know why I really came today? You said you wanted to see if you should take a more active role. That was part of it. But the real reason? Thomas's voice cracked slightly. My daughter, Sarah, she's 64. She's been trying to get back into the workforce after taking 15 years off to care for her husband while he had cancer. He died 2 years ago. She's been applying to jobs for 18 months. Do you know how many interviews she's gotten? Thomas, 3. 3 interviews in 18 months. And at every single one, they treated her exactly how I was treated today. Like she was useless, obsolete, an embarrassment for even trying. Richard was silent on the other end. She called me last week crying. Said maybe they're right. Maybe she is too old. Maybe she should just give up and accept that her working life is over at 64. Thomas's voice hardened. I have never in my entire life wanted to hurt someone as much as I wanted to hurt those people in that room today. Not because they humiliated me, I can take it, but because they're doing this to thousands of people like Sarah. People who have decades of experience and still have so much to give, but can't get past the first interview because of their birth certificate. That's going to change, Richard said firmly. Starting tomorrow, it better. Because if it doesn't, I'm selling my shares to your biggest competitor and watching them destroy you. The threat hung in the air. You wouldn't. Try me, Richard. Your father and mine built this company on principles. If those principles are gone, then so am I. After hanging up, Thomas pulled out his wallet and removed a worn photograph. Sarah at her college graduation, young and hopeful, the world ahead of her. And next to it, a recent photo, Sarah looking tired, defeated, aged beyond her years by rejection and grief. I'm going to fix this, sweetheart, he whispered to the photo. For you, for everyone like you, tomorrow's meeting was going to be very interesting indeed. That evening, Thomas sat in his Upper East Side apartment, surrounded by memories. Photos lined the walls, him and his father celebrating the company's 10th anniversary. His wedding to Catherine, his daughter Sarah's childhood, his 2 sons growing up, and one photo that always made him pause. Edward Sterling on his deathbed, thin and frail, gripping Thomas's hand with surprising strength. Promise me something, Edward had said, his voice barely a whisper. Anything, Dad, don't let them forget. Don't let them forget why we started this company. I won't. No, listen to me. Edward's grip tightened. Richard is a good man, but he's a businessman first. He'll chase profits. He'll forget that we built Goldman and Sterling to be different, to value people over numbers, to treat everyone with dignity. Edward started coughing, a rattling sound that made Thomas's heart break. Promise me that if they ever lose their way, you'll step in. You'll remind them. You'll make them better. I promise, Dad. Even if it's hard. Even if they resist. Promise me, Thomas, I promise. That had been 3 years ago. And Thomas had kept his distance, honoring his father's wish that he not interfere unless absolutely necessary. He'd stayed away, trusting Richard to maintain the values they'd built together. But over the past year, he'd started hearing things, whispers from friends still in the industry, articles about Goldman and Sterling's aggressive culture, and worst of all, Sarah's experiences. His phone rang. Sarah. Dad, how did it go? Thomas hesitated. He hadn't told her the real reason he'd gone to the interview. Hadn't wanted to get her hopes up that he might be able to change things. It was educational. That bad, huh? She laughed without humor. Welcome to my world. Let me guess. They looked at your age, decided you were senile, and couldn't get you out fast enough? Something like that? I'm sorry, Dad. I know you were trying to understand what I've been going through, but you didn't have to put yourself through that humiliation. Thomas felt his chest tighten. Sarah, sweetheart, it wasn't just to understand. I'm going to fix this. Fix what? Ageism? Dad, you can't fix an entire system. I can fix one company. And if I do it right, maybe others will follow. There was a pause on the other end. What are you planning? Tomorrow's board meeting. I'm exercising my rights as a shareholder. And I'm making some changes, Dad. Please don't do anything rash. I don't want you risking your relationship with Richard over your dignity, over the dignity of every person over 50 who's being thrown away like garbage. Sarah, this isn't rash. This is overdue. He could hear her crying softly on the other end. You really went through an interview? For me? For you? For your Uncle Charles, who was forced into early retirement at 58? For your mother, his voice caught. Your mother, who, before she died, told me she was grateful she'd never have to experience being too old for the workforce. Catherine had passed 8 years ago. Cancer, like Sarah's husband. It had been the hardest period of Thomas's life, watching her waste away, knowing all his money couldn't save her. I would have loved this, Sarah said. You going to battle for people who can't fight for themselves. She always said that privilege means responsibility. I have the power to change things, so I have to. After hanging up with Sarah, Thomas pulled out a leather-bound journal, his father's journal from the early days of the company. He flipped to an entry from 1982, written in Edward's precise handwriting. Richard and I finalized the partnership agreement today. Goldman and Sterling Investment Partners. We argued for hours about the values statement. Richard wanted to focus on maximizing returns and aggressive growth. I insisted we include treating every client and employee with dignity, regardless of age, background, or circumstance. Richard thought I was being naive. Edward, he said, we're in finance. Nobody cares about dignity. They care about money. I told him that the moment we stop caring about dignity, we become just another soulless firm. There are 1,000 companies chasing money. But how many chase money while remaining decent human beings? He finally agreed. I hope he meant it. I hope 30 years from now. Goldman and Sterling is still a place where people matter more than profits. Thomas closed the journal, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, Dad. They forgot. But I'm going to remind them. He opened his laptop and began preparing for tomorrow's meeting. What these people didn't know, what they couldn't know from his retired old man persona, was that Thomas Sterling was one of the most ruthless negotiators Wall Street had ever seen. He'd made his first fortune at 30 by spotting the internet boom before anyone else. He'd made his second fortune by shorting the housing market in 2007. He'd made his third fortune in Bitcoin in 2013, getting in early and getting out at exactly the right time. The self-employed period they'd mocked? He'd been running a private investment fund that had outperformed every major hedge fund for 15 consecutive years. He'd retired not because he couldn't keep up, but because he'd achieved everything he wanted financially and had wanted to spend time with Catherine before she passed. Now, 3 years after her death, with his father's company betraying its founding principles, Thomas Sterling was coming out of retirement, and he was bringing the full weight of his experience, his wealth, and his rage. Tomorrow's board, 9 a.m., Goldman and Sterling headquarters, boardroom. The boardroom was designed to intimidate. 20-foot ceilings, a table that could seat 30 people, and windows overlooking all of Manhattan, a view that said, "We own this city." 12 board members filed in, taking their seats around the massive table. Most were in their 50s and 60s, successful, wealthy, comfortable. They handled billions of dollars and made decisions that moved markets. Richard Goldman sat at the head of the table looking tired and stressed. To his left, an empty chair were Sterling's old seat, vacant for 3 years. Jennifer, Marcus, Ashley, and Blake stood against the back wall as summoned. They looked like prisoners awaiting sentencing. At precisely 9 a.m., the door opened. Thomas Sterling walked in, and the room went silent. But this wasn't the confused old man from yesterday's interview. This was Thomas Sterling, as the board remembered him from years past, commanding, impeccably dressed in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost $15,000, carrying himself with the authority of someone who'd built empires. The transformation was startling. Same person, but radiating completely different energy. He walked directly to his father's old chair and sat down without asking permission. "Good morning, gentlemen." "Ladies," he nodded to the 3 women on the board. "Thank you for accommodating my request to attend, Thomas," Richard began. "Before we start, I want to apologize again for yesterday's incident." "We'll get to that," Thomas interrupted smoothly. "First, I'd like to formally announce that I'm exercising my rights under the partnership agreement. Specifically, Section 7.3. Any founding partner's heir maintaining at least 25% ownership has the right to active participation in company governance, including a board seat and co-equal management authority." The board members exchanged glances. This was not a casual visit. "You're invoking the co-CEO clause?" One board member, Patricia Hartwell, asked carefully. "I am effective immediately, I'm assuming the position of co-chief executive officer of Goldman and Sterling, with equal authority to Richard in all operational and strategic decisions." "Thomas," Richard said, his voice strained, "can we discuss this privately before?" "No, this needs to be public, transparent, on the record." Thomas pulled out a folder. "Because what I discovered yesterday cannot be hidden behind closed doors." He looked directly at the 4 people standing against the wall, and they visibly flinched. "Yesterday I conducted an experiment. I applied for a mid-level position at this firm using my real name, real resume, but downplaying my background. I wanted to see how applicants are treated. Specifically, how older applicants are treated." He pulled out a document and slid it across to Richard. "This is the transcript of my interview. I recorded it." "Yeah, I know that's legal in New York with one-party consent before anyone asks." Richard's face went pale as he started reading. "Let me highlight some key moments," Thomas continued, his voice like ice. "Marcus Chun asked me if I knew what LinkedIn was. Ashley Rodriguez told me I'd be the weird old guy everyone feels awkward around. Blake Morrison suggested I lack the stamina required for the job. And Jennifer Walsh, our head of human resources, told me directly that I'm not qualified due to my age." The board erupted in whispers. "This isn't just unprofessional," Thomas continued. "It's illegal. It's discrimination under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. It's a violation of our company's stated values. And it's a betrayal of everything my father built this company to represent. Mr. Sterling," Jennifer stepped forward, her voice shaking, "I want to apologize. We made a terrible mistake." "You made a policy," Thomas corrected sharply. "This wasn't one bad interview. This is systematic. So I did more research." He pulled out more documents. "In the past 5 years, Goldman and Sterling has hired 847 new employees. Do you know how many were over 50? 12. That's 1.4%. In a country where 22% of the workforce is over 50. But that's just because younger people apply more," Blake tried. "I obtained your application data through my shareholder rights. You received 4,200 applications from people over 50 in the past 5 years. That's almost 30% of your applicant pool. But you hired 1.4% of them. Either everyone over 50 is incompetent, which is statistically impossible, or you're discriminating." The board was silent, stunned. "Furthermore," Thomas continued, "your average employee tenure is 3.2 years. You have massive turnover, constant training costs, and a culture of burnout. Meanwhile, your few employees over 50 have an average tenure of 11 years. They're more loyal, more stable, more experienced. But you're systematically excluding them." Patricia Hartwell leaned forward. "Thomas, these are serious allegations. Do you have proof beyond yesterday's interview?" "I have an entire report." He pulled out a thick binder. Exit interviews where older employees reported age-based harassment. Internal emails joking about clearing out the dinosaurs. Performance reviews where experienced employees were marked down for being resistant to change. Code for too old. He slid the binder to Richard. "Your company, Richard. The one my father built on principles of dignity and respect. This is what it's become." Richard was flipping through the pages, his face growing darker with each one. I didn't know it was this bad." "You didn't want to know," Thomas corrected, "because knowing would require action." and action is uncomfortable. He stood up, walking to the windows overlooking Manhattan. My daughter, Sarah, is 64. She's been trying to get back into financial analysis for 18 months after taking time off to care for her dying husband. She has 30 years of experience, an MBA from Wharton. She was one of the first women to break into investment banking in the 80s. He turned back to the room. She's gotten 3 interviews in 18 months. At every single one, she was treated exactly how I was treated yesterday. And it's destroyed her. She started to believe she's worthless, that her experience means nothing, that she should just give up. His voice cracked slightly. That's what your policies do. They don't just reject resumes. They destroy people's sense of worth. They tell experienced, capable professionals that they're obsolete, that they should disappear quietly and stop bothering the real workers. Ashley was crying now. Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry. I didn't think that real people with real feelings were on the receiving end of your cruelty. You just saw an abstract old person who didn't fit your image of what an employee should look like. Thomas returned to his seat. So here's what's going to happen. As co-CEO, I'm implementing immediate changes. Richard, you can agree with me, or we can fight this out in court and the press. Your choice. Richard looked at the documents, at the board members, at the 4 terrified employees against the wall. What changes? He asked quietly. 1. Complete overhaul of hiring practices. Age-blind resume reviews. Structured interviews with no age-related questions. Mandatory age diversity targets, not quotas, but goals we actively work toward. 2. Creation of an elder advisory board, minimum age 60, bringing in experienced professionals to guide strategy and mentor younger employees. 3. Mandatory training for all employees on age discrimination. Not sensitivity training where people tune out actual consequences for discriminatory behavior. 4. Revision of performance. Reviews to eliminate age-coded language. No more resistant to change, low energy, not a culture fit. Actual metrics only. Thomas looked at the board. 5. A public apology and a $50 million fund dedicated to organizations fighting age discrimination in employment. We'll call it the Edward Sterling Initiative. And 6. He looked directly at Jennifer, Marcus, Ashley, and Blake. Accountability for yesterday's interview team. The 4 of them looked like they might be sick. Thomas, Richard said carefully, what kind of accountability are you proposing? That depends on them. I'm offering a choice. He turned to face them directly. Option 1, immediate termination. Severance package, good references, but you're done here. You take your prejudice somewhere else. Option 2, you stay, but you undergo 6 months of intensive retraining. You'll work directly with older employees, learning from them, understanding what you don't know. You'll lose your current positions, demoted to entry-level analyst roles with entry-level pay. You'll rebuild your careers from the ground up, earning back your authority through demonstrated change, and most importantly, you'll personally apologize to every person over 50 in this company, and you'll participate in the recruitment effort to bring more experienced professionals into Goldman and Sterling. Jennifer spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. You want us to start over? Lose everything we've built? You built your careers on discrimination, Thomas said flatly. I'm giving you the chance to rebuild them on merit. That's more mercy than you showed me yesterday. Marcus raised his hand tentatively. What happens if we choose option 2 but don't change, don't learn? Then you're fired anyway. But this time with no severance, no references, and a permanent mark on your record that you failed to overcome documented discrimination behavior. Blake stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, I choose option 2. I want to change. I want to learn. What I did yesterday was inexcusable, but I don't want to be that person anymore. Ashley nodded quickly. Me too. Option 2, please. Marcus hesitated, then option 2. I'll do whatever it takes. All eyes turned to Jennifer. She stood there for a long moment, pride and fear warring on her face. Finally, I'm the head of HR. I should have known better. I should have set the standard. Instead, I led the charge in humiliating you. Yes, Thomas agreed. You did. I don't deserve option 2, but I'm asking for it anyway, because I have a 13-year-old daughter who's watching me, and I want to show her that when you make a mistake, even a huge one, you fix it. You don't run away. Thomas studied her for a long moment. Accepted. All 4 of you. Welcome to your second chance. Don't waste it. The relief on their faces was palpable. Patricia Hartwell spoke up. Thomas, these are extensive changes. Implementation will be expensive and disruptive, so is a discrimination lawsuit, Thomas countered, which is what we'll face if we don't change. Multiple lawsuits, actually. I've already been contacted by 3 employment lawyers representing older workers who've been rejected by this firm. You've been contacted? Richard asked, surprised. The video went viral. What video? Thomas pulled out his phone and turned it to face the board. On the screen was footage from yesterday. The interview room, the mocking laughter, every cruel comment clearly audible. I wore a camera, Thomas explained. The whole thing was live-streamed to my private social media. I have 200,000 followers from my investment career. They saw everything. He scrolled through the comments. My father was treated like this at 62. This is why I can't get hired. I'm 58 and just gave up trying. Thousands of comments from people sharing their experiences. Oh God, Richard said. This is going to be everywhere. It already is. The Wall Street Journal called me this morning. So did Bloomberg, CNBC, and the New York Times. They all want interviews about age discrimination in finance. Thomas put his phone away. So we have 2 options. We can fight this, deny everything, and watch as the court of public opinion destroys us. Or we can get ahead of it, admit we had a systemic problem, announce these sweeping reforms, and become the industry leader in age diversity. Turn our failure into leadership, Patricia said slowly. It's not a bad strategy. It's the only strategy, Thomas corrected, because I won't let my father's company be remembered as a place that discriminated against the very generation that built this industry. Richard looked around the table at the other board members. One by one, they nodded. All in favor of Thomas's reforms? Richard asked. Every hand went up. Then it's unanimous. Thomas, welcome back to Goldman and Sterling as co-CEO. Thank you. Now let's get to work. We have a lot to fix. As the meeting broke up, Thomas caught Richard's arm. I'm sorry it came to this, but my father made me promise. I know. He made me promise too, and I broke it. I let the culture rot. I prioritized profits over people. Richard's voice was thick with emotion. Edward would be ashamed of what we became. Then let's make him proud again. Meeting was going to be a bloodbath. 3 months later, the transformation of Goldman and Sterling was nothing short of revolutionary. The Elder Advisory Board had been established with 8 members, ages 62 to 76. They met weekly with the executive team, providing guidance on strategy, risk management, and long-term planning. And the results were immediate and dramatic. In their first meeting, a 70-year-old former bank CEO named Margaret Chun identified a flaw in a proposed investment strategy that would have cost the firm $300 million. I've seen this exact pattern before, she explained to the room full of 30-something analysts who designed the strategy. In 1987, right before Black Monday, you're chasing short-term gains and ignoring systemic risk. The analysts had been skeptical until they ran the historical models. She was right. They'd restructured the entire approach, saving the company from potential disaster. How did you see that? One of the analysts asked Margaret after the meeting, because I lived through it. I lost $40 million in one day in 1987. You'll never forget a loss like that. You'll learn to recognize the pattern. But our models didn't show. Models are based on data. Experience is based on pain. Sometimes pain is a better teacher. The analyst, humbled, asked, would you be willing to mentor me? Teach me to see what you see? Margaret smiled. I'd be honored. That conversation was repeated across the firm. Young analysts, initially resistant to the old people being forced on them, quickly realized that experience was invaluable. The hiring numbers changed dramatically too. In 3 months, Goldman and Sterling hired 47 new employees, over 50 more than they'd hired in the previous 5 years combined. One of them was Sarah Sterling. Thomas sat in his office, which used to be his father's office, kept preserved for 3 years, now renovated but still carrying Edward's spirit-reviewing reports. A knock on the door. Sarah. Dad, you wanted to see me? Come in, sweetheart. Sit down. She took a seat across from him, still looking slightly uncomfortable in her new role as senior portfolio manager. She'd been hired 6 weeks ago after a genuine, respectful interview process where her experience was valued rather than dismissed. How are you settling in? Thomas asked. It's different than I remember. The technology has changed so much. Some of the younger analysts have to help me with the new systems. And how do they treat you when you ask for help? Respectfully, patiently. Some of them even thank me when I share historical context about market patterns. She smiled. Yesterday, a 26-year-old asked me to lunch so I could tell her about the savings and loan crisis in the 80s. She was writing a paper and wanted a first-hand perspective. That's wonderful. Dad, I need to thank you for what you did, for putting yourself through that horrible interview, for fighting for people like me. I did it because it was right. No, Sarah interrupted gently. You did it because you love me. Because you watched me being rejected over and over and it hurt you. Don't diminish that. Thomas felt his eyes water. You're right, it hurt me terribly. Watching you lose confidence, watching you doubt yourself. You're brilliant, Sarah, you always have been. And seeing the world treat you like you were worthless just because you've lived, ... double quotes, he couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah came around the desk and hugged him. Thank you, Dad, for seeing me, for fighting for me. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter both understanding that this was about more than just a job. The public response to Goldman and Sterling's transformation had been enormous. The Wall Street Journal had run a front-page story, Goldman and Sterling's Age Revolution. How one man changed Wall Street's youth obsession. Thomas had given interviews explaining the changes, sharing his father's original vision, and challenging other firms to follow suit. The finance industry has become obsessed with youth, he'd told Bloomberg. We worship the 25-year-old who works 100 hours a week and thinks they can do anything. But we ignore the 65-year-old who's actually done everything and knows what works and what doesn't. Experience isn't obsolescence, it's advantage. And any company that doesn't understand that is leaving money and wisdom on the table. The response had been mixed. Some firms doubled down on their youth-focused culture, but others started quietly reaching out, asking for advice on implementing similar programs. Within 6 months, 15 major financial firms had announced age diversity initiatives. Within a year, it was over 50. The movement had spread beyond finance. Tech companies, law firms, consulting groups all starting to reconsider their unconscious and sometimes conscious age discrimination. 1 year later, the anniversary celebration was held in the same building where Thomas had been humiliated. But the 12th floor conference room had been renamed the Edward Sterling Conference Room and was now used primarily for mentorship meetings between junior and senior employees. Over 200 people attended the celebration. Current employees, new hires, board members, and special guests, including representatives from the AARP and several age advocacy organizations. Thomas stood at the podium looking out at the crowd. His hair was a little whiter, his movements a bit slower, but his eyes were bright with purpose. A year ago, I walked into this building as a test. I wanted to see if my father's company had maintained the values he built it on, and I discovered it hadn't. We'd become exactly what he feared, a place that valued youth over wisdom, speed over thoughtfulness, flash over substance. He paused, letting that sink in. Today, I'm proud to say we've changed. Not perfectly, change is never perfect, but meaningfully. We've hired 93 professionals over 50. We've created mentorship programs that pair experience with energy. We've proven that age diversity isn't just ethical, it's profitable. He clicked to a slide showing the firm's performance over the past year. Our returns are up 23% compared to last year. Our employee retention has improved by 40%. Our client satisfaction scores have reached all-time highs. And we've avoided 2 major investment mistakes that would have cost us over $500 million. Mistakes identified by our elder advisory board. Applause filled the room. But more important than the numbers are the stories. He clicked to photos. Younger and older employees working together, laughing together, learning from each other. Margaret Chun, 72, mentoring Rachel Okafor, 27. Margaret shares decades of market wisdom. Rachel teaches Margaret about AI-driven analysis tools. Together, they've created investment strategies neither could have developed alone. Robert Washington, 66, and Tyler Chun, 24. Robert's experience in risk management combined with Tyler's programming skills led to a new early warning system that's already prevented 3 major losses. Sharon Rodriguez, 69, and the woman who once mocked her interview, Ashley Rodriguez. Yes, they're related. Sharon is Ashley's mother. I got gasps and murmurs from the crowd. Ashley stood up in the audience. May I say something? Thomas nodded. She walked to the front, her face showing emotion. A year ago, I told Mr. Sterling he'd be the weird old guy everyone feels awkward around. I said this not knowing he was Thomas Sterling, but more shamefully, not knowing that my own mother had been facing the same discrimination for years. Her voice shook. My mom retired at 62 after my father died. 2 years later, she wanted to return to work. She has a master's degree in finance, 35 years of experience. But she couldn't get hired anywhere. And I never questioned why. I never thought about it. When Mr. Sterling's video went viral and I saw myself mocking him, I went home and asked my mom if she'd experienced similar treatment. She broke down crying. She'd been rejected from 47 positions. At several interviews, she'd been told directly she was too old. Ashley wiped her eyes. I called Mr. Sterling and asked if he'd interview my mother. Not as a favor, as a genuine candidate. He said yes. And after one of the most rigorous interviews of her life, she was hired as a senior risk analyst. She looked at Thomas. You saved my mother. But more than that, you saved me from becoming someone I'm ashamed of. The demotion, the retraining, the humiliation of starting over, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because now I work alongside my mom. I see her brilliance every day. I learn from her, and I understand what I was too arrogant to see before. That age isn't a barrier to excellence. It's a prerequisite. The applause was thunderous. Sharon Rodriguez came to the front and hugged her daughter. The image mother and daughter working together, learning from each other, became iconic. It was on the cover of Fortune magazine the following month. After the celebration, Thomas found himself alone in his office, looking at the photo of his father. "We did it, Dad. We fixed what was broken. The company is what you wanted it to be again." A knock on the door. Jennifer Walsh. "Mr. Sterling, do you have a moment?" "Of course. Come in." She sat down, looking nervous despite the year that had passed. "I wanted to give you this." She handed him an envelope. "What is it?" "My resignation." Thomas's eyebrows rose. "You're quitting?" "Not quitting. Stepping down as HR director. I've spent the past year learning, changing, trying to be better. And I realized something. I can't be the face of HR anymore. There are people more qualified. People who've experienced discrimination and understand it viscerally. So I'm recommending my replacement, Robert Washington. He's 66, has 30 years of HR experience, and spent the last 10 years unable to get hired anywhere despite his qualifications. Thomas was surprised. "You're recommending someone to take your job?" "I'm recommending the best person for the job, which is what I should have done all along instead of protecting my own position. What will you do?" "I'm taking a position in training and development, teaching new managers how to recognize and combat their own biases. It's a step down in prestige and pay, but it's where I can do the most good." Thomas studied her. "You really have changed." "I had to. My daughter was watching. And I wanted her to see that when you mess up, really truly mess up, you don't make excuses. You fix it. You become better. Jennifer, I'm proud of you. Don't be. I'm just trying to earn back the respect I lost. It'll take more than a year, maybe, but you're doing the work. That's what matters." After she left, Thomas sat in the quiet office, feeling a sense of completion. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Dad just closed a $500 million deal. The client specifically asked for me because they wanted someone with real experience, not just book knowledge. Never thought I'd hear those words again. Thank you for giving me back my career and my confidence. Love you." Thomas smiled, tears streaming down his face. This was why he'd done it, not for revenge, not for vindication. For Sarah, for Sharon, for every person who'd been told they were too old, too slow, too past their prime. For his father's legacy, and for the simple truth that age is not an ending, it's an evolution. 5 years later, Thomas Sterling stood at the podium of the New York Stock Exchange, about to ring the opening bell. At 73, he moved a bit slower, but his mind was still sharp, his presence still commanding. Beside him, Richard Goldman, Sarah Sterling, and members of the Elder Advisory Board. This was a ceremonial moment. Goldman and Sterling had just been ranked the #1 investment firm in America by Forbes, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. But for Thomas, the rankings didn't matter. What mattered was what they represented. The financial industry had fundamentally changed. Age diversity was now the norm, not the exception. Companies competed to recruit experienced professionals. Job postings no longer had hidden age limits. Overqualified had been recognized as code for discrimination and was actively challenged. The movement Thomas started with one humiliating interview had transformed an entire industry. As he rang the bell, signaling the start of trading, Thomas thought about his father. Edward Sterling had built a company on principles. Thomas had fought to restore those principles when they'd been lost. And now those principles were spreading beyond one company to reshape how society viewed aging, experience, and value. After the ceremony, a young reporter approached Thomas for an interview. "Mr. Sterling, you've become the face of age diversity in corporate America. What's your message to other older workers who've faced discrimination?" Thomas thought carefully before answering. "Don't give up. Don't believe them when they tell you you're obsolete. Experience doesn't expire. Wisdom doesn't have a sell-by date. You've lived through recessions, technological revolutions, cultural shifts. You've made mistakes and learned from them. That knowledge is priceless. And to the young people who might be dismissive of older colleagues, remember that someday, if you're lucky enough to live that long, you'll be the old person. You'll be the one people dismiss without knowing your story. So treat others the way you hope to be treated, with respect, with curiosity, with the understanding that everyone, regardless of age, has something valuable to offer." One more question. Do you have any regrets about how you exposed the Discrimination at Goldman and Sterling. It was very public, very confrontational. No regrets, Thomas said firmly. Because quiet complaints don't create change. Sometimes you have to be loud. Sometimes you have to make people uncomfortable. That's how injustice becomes visible. The interview ended, but Thomas stayed, watching the trading floor, a floor that now included employees ranging from 22 to 76 years old. All working together, all valued. His phone rang. Sarah, Dad, turn on CNBC. He found a monitor showing the news. The headline, Age discrimination cases dropped 40% since Goldman and Sterling reforms. The anchor was explaining, what started as one man's stand against discrimination has become a nationwide movement. Companies across America have implemented age-inclusive policies, and the results speak for themselves. Higher retention, better performance, increased innovation. Sarah's voice on the phone. You changed the world, Dad. We changed it, sweetheart. All of us. Everyone who refused to accept that age discrimination was normal or acceptable. Mom would be so proud. Thomas felt his throat tighten. I hope so. I hope both your grandparents are proud. I hope they know we kept the promise. After hanging up, Thomas made his way slowly to a bench overlooking the trading floor. His knees ached. His back was stiff. He was, undeniably, an old man now. But he was an old man who mattered, who'd made a difference, who'd used his privilege and his pain to create change. A young analyst, couldn't have been more than 25, approached him hesitantly. Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you. For what? My grandmother. She's 67. She was forced into early retirement 5 years ago. After your reform spread, she was able to get rehired at her old company. She's happier than I've ever seen her. The young man's eyes were wet. She raised me. She's the most important person in my life. And watching her feel worthless after she retired was killing me. You gave her back her sense of purpose. So thank you. Thomas shook his hand. What's your name? David Walsh. Well, David Walsh. Tell your grandmother I said she's lucky to have a grandson who sees her value. Many people her age don't have that. I'll tell her. And Mr. Sterling, when I'm in a position to hire people, I'll remember this. I'll remember that age is just a number. That experience matters. That everyone deserves respect. Then I've done my job. As David walked away, Thomas sat alone with his thoughts. 5 years ago, he'd walked into an interview expecting discrimination, and he'd gotten it. But instead of walking away, he'd fought back. He'd used his power, his wealth, and his pain to create something better. Not perfect. The world still had ageism. People still made assumptions based on gray hair and wrinkles, but it was better. Measurably, meaningfully better. He pulled out his wallet and removed 2 photos. His father, Edward, and his wife, Catherine. I kept the promise, he whispered. Both of you, Dad, I saved your company. Catherine, I used our privilege to help people who couldn't help themselves. A gust of wind blew through the open space, and Thomas chose to believe it was them, acknowledging his words. He stood up slowly, using his cane, and made his way to the elevator. There was work to do. There was always work to do. Because the fight wasn't over. It would never be completely over. Prejudice doesn't die, it just evolves, finds new hiding places, new justifications. But now there were warriors fighting it. Now there was awareness. Now there was change. And Thomas Sterling, 73 years old, had proven something fundamental. You're never too old to matter. You're never too experienced to contribute. You're never too late to make a difference. 10 years after the interview, the Edward Sterling Center for Intergenerational Excellence opened on what would have been Edward's 90th birthday. It was a physical space in Manhattan, part research institute, part training center, part gathering place dedicated to studying and promoting age diversity in the workplace. Thomas, now 78, cut the ribbon alongside Sarah, 74, and still working. Richard Goldman, 75, and Jennifer Walsh, 45. Now CEO of a diversity consulting firm she'd founded. The center's first major research project had just been published. A comprehensive 10-year study tracking companies that embraced age diversity versus those that didn't. The results were unequivocal. Companies with age-diverse teams outperformed age-homogeneous teams by 35%. Innovation rates were 60% higher when teams included members over 50. Employee satisfaction scores were 45% better in age-inclusive environments. Retention of all employees, young and old, improved dramatically when age diversity was prioritized. The business case was ironclad. Age diversity wasn't charity. It was strategy. But more importantly, the study documented something harder to quantify: the human stories. The 58-year-old engineer who'd been unemployed for 3 years, hired by a tech startup who then designed their most successful product. The 65-year-old teacher forced into retirement who became an educational consultant, revolutionizing curriculum design. The 70-year-old programmer who'd been told he was obsolete, now mentoring a team of 20-somethings and teaching them debugging techniques that only decades of experience could provide. Thousands of stories. Thousands of lives reclaimed from the garbage heap of age discrimination. At the opening ceremony, Thomas gave his final major speech. 10 years ago, he began, his voice softer now but still clear. I walked into an interview and was treated like I was worthless because I was old. It was one of the most painful experiences of my life, not because it hurt my ego, but because I knew that if it could happen to me, with all my privilege and resources, how much worse must it be for others? He paused, looking out at the audience of over 1,000 people. That day I made a choice. I could walk away angry or I could fight back. I chose to fight. And all of you, he gestured to the crowd, chose to fight with me. We changed an industry. Then we changed multiple industries. And now we're changing how society thinks about aging itself. He clicked to a slide showing demographic data. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over 65. We're living longer, staying healthier longer, wanting to contribute longer. But if we maintain outdated attitudes about age and work, we'll waste the talents of millions of people. Or, he clicked to the next slide showing thriving intergenerational teams. We can embrace the wisdom that comes with living. We can build teams that combine the energy of youth with the experience of age. We can create workplaces where everyone, regardless of when they were born, is valued for what they can contribute. Another slide. Photos from the past 10 years. The Elder Advisory Board. Sarah at her desk. Jennifer teaching bias recognition classes. Robert Washington, now Goldman and Sterling's chief people officer. Ashley Rodriguez working alongside her mother Sharon. These are the faces of our revolution. Young and old, different backgrounds, different generations, but united by one belief, that age is not a limitation. It's a dimension of diversity that makes us stronger. He clicked to his final slide, a quote from his father's journal. The day we stop learning from those who came before us is the day we stop progressing. Every generation stands on the shoulders of the previous one. When we reject our elders, we reject our own foundation. Edward Sterling. 1982, my father understood something that took our society too long to relearn. Experience is not the enemy of innovation. It's the foundation innovation builds on. Thomas gripped the podium, his hands shaking slightly, not from emotion, but from the Parkinson's that had started 2 years ago. Another reminder that age brings challenges, but also gifts. I'm 78 now. I have Parkinson's, my memory isn't what it was. I move slowly. By every metric our culture uses to judge value. I should be invisible, irrelevant, obsolete, and yet last month I consulted on a merger that saved 10,000 jobs. Why? Because I'd seen this exact pattern in 1989 and knew how to navigate it. That knowledge didn't come from a textbook. It came from living. He looked directly at the cameras broadcasting the event. To every older person watching this who's been told they're too old, you're not. Your experience is valuable. Your wisdom matters. Keep fighting, keep contributing. The world needs you. To every young person watching, learn from those who've walked the path before you. Ask questions. Show respect. Seek mentorship from people who've lived through what you're facing. You'll be older someday to make sure you're building a world you'll want to live in. And to every employer, stop throwing away talent because of birthday candles. Start valuing experience as much as you value energy. Build intergenerational teams. You'll be amazed at what they accomplished. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After the ceremony, Thomas found a quiet corner. His body was tired. The Parkinson's made every public appearance exhausting. But his mind was clear, his heart full. Sarah found him there. Dad, they want photos. Press interviews. Can you manage? Give me a minute, sweetheart. She sat beside him, and they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of knowing someone. Do you think Grandpa would be proud? Sarah asked. I think he'd say we did what needed doing. That's all he ever asked. And Mom? Thomas pulled out his wallet. He still carried Catherine's photo, worn and faded now. Your mother would say we prove that love doesn't end when someone dies, it transforms. Her love for people, for justice, for doing right. It's in everything we built here. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, and Thomas felt a profound sense of completion. He'd lived a good life, made mistakes, learned from them, used his privilege for good, made a difference. In the end, that's all anyone could ask for. 2 years later, Thomas Sterling passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 80, surrounded by family. The Parkinson's had progressed, but he'd remained sharp and engaged until the very end, still consulting, still mentoring, still fighting for age inclusion. His obituary in the New York Times ran for 3 full pages, chronicling his investment career, his fight against age discrimination, and the movement he'd sparked that had transformed corporate America. But the most meaningful tribute came from an unexpected source. At his funeral, over 2,000 people attended. But the eulogy wasn't given by a CEO or a politician. It was given by Jennifer Walsh, the HR director who'd mocked him at that fateful interview 10 years earlier. She stood at the podium looking out at the sea of faces, young and old, every age represented. "I killed Thomas Sterling," she began, and the room went silent. Not literally. But 10 years ago, in an interview room, I killed a part of him. I killed his faith in humanity. I killed his belief that people would treat him with basic dignity. I mocked him. I dismissed him. I told him he was worthless because of his age. Her voice shook, and his response was to forgive me, to give me a second chance I didn't deserve, to teach me that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work. Everything I am today in my career, my understanding of justice, my ability to teach others, I owe to Thomas Sterling. Not because he was kind to me, because he was honest with me. He held me accountable while offering redemption. She pulled out a letter. He gave me this a month before he died. He asked me to read it at his funeral. And she unfolded it with trembling hands. "Jennifer, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't be sad. I lived 80 years, loved deeply, made a difference, and died knowing my work will continue. But I need to tell you something I never said while I was alive. Thank you. Thank you for being the catalyst. If you hadn't humiliated me that day, I might never have fought back. I might have walked away and let the discrimination continue. Your cruelty, paradoxically, gave me the anger I needed to create change. I don't say this to make you feel good. I say it because it's true. Sometimes our worst moments become someone else's wake-up call. Your worst moment became mine, and my response became a movement. You've spent 10 years atoning. I release you from that burden. You're forgiven. Not because you earned it, but because carrying guilt forever helps no one. Instead, keep teaching. Keep showing others how to recognize their biases. Keep building workplaces where everyone, regardless of age, race, gender, background, is valued. That's how you honor me. Not with guilt, but with action. I hope I've made my father proud. I hope I've made Catherine proud. I hope I've made a difference. But mostly I hope I've shown that it's never too late to fight for what's right. That age is not an ending. That experience is power. And that every person deserves to be seen for who they are, not how old they are. Live well, Jennifer. Teach well. And when you meet older workers who remind you of me, treat them with the respect you learned to show. That's my legacy. That's what matters. Asterisk with forgiveness and hope. Thomas. Jennifer folded the letter carefully. Thomas Sterling taught me that age is not a disability, that experience is not obsolescence, that you're never too old to matter. He taught an entire industry that lesson. He changed how millions of people think about aging and work. But most importantly, he taught me and all of us that when we see injustice, we have a choice. We can ignore it, or we can fight it. Thomas chose to fight, and he won. Not just for himself, but for everyone. She looked up at the ceiling as if Thomas could hear her. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for everything. For the second chance. For the lesson. For proving that it's never too late to make a difference. Rest well. Your work continues. The Edward Sterling Center for Intergenerational Excellence continued for decades, becoming the leading research institution on age diversity. The Goldman and Sterling Investment Bank maintained its commitment to age inclusion, remaining at the top of industry rankings. Sarah Sterling worked until she was 82, finally retiring not because she had to, but because she wanted to spend more time with her grandchildren, who she was teaching about the importance of respecting elders. Jennifer Walsh's consulting firm trained over 50,000 HR professionals in age bias recognition, fundamentally changing hiring practices across corporate America. And the interview video, that painful, illuminating footage of Thomas being mocked, became required viewing in business schools across the country. A case study in discrimination and the courage to fight back. The lessons endured. Don't judge people by their age. Judge them by their character, their competence, their contributions. Experience is not weakness. It's wisdom earned through living. You're never too old to matter. Never too late to make a difference. Never past your prime. You're just entering a different kind of prime. And most importantly, when you see injustice, even when you're the victim, you have a choice. Stay silent or fight back. Thomas Sterling chose to fight and he won. This story is dedicated to every person over 50 who has been told they're too old for the job, the opportunity, the dream. You're not. Your experience is your superpower. Your wisdom is irreplaceable. Keep fighting. Keep contributing. The world needs what only you can offer. And to every person under 30 reading this, you will be old someday. Build the world you want to live in when that day comes. Respect your elders not because they're old, but because they've earned it through living. Age is not an enemy. It's an achievement. Thomas Sterling proved that. Now it's our turn to carry on his fight.